What's up, everyone? Welcome to Sir Hunt's Reviews, obviously. I am joined by my lovely Conrad across the pond. Well, it's a weird noise. Across the pond, Robert from Deep Geek, and we're going to be chatting Lord of the Rings. But before we do that, Robert, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you at?
Yeah, of course. Hi, it's an honor to be back on this channel. It has been a little while, but I always enjoy it. My channel is called Deep Geek. So if you enjoy A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, Tolkien, I'm getting into a few other things as well, but that's what I'm focusing in on, then please do come and check me out.
Hell yeah. I've linked those down below in the description. So I'm actually new to this world myself. Like, I've obviously seen the Lord of the Rings movies a lot. And Robert is more adept at it than me, but he's still kind of learning too. So we're gonna try to make this like almost like a beginner's guide. We'll sort of focus on, I guess, a little bit about the creation of the rings, and then maybe what the show is gonna focus on. And then I guess we could talk about a few of the cast members we don't really know, because Robert was telling me the second age of the show is going to be focusing on is like a 3,400 year period. So, you know, we kind of think it's going to focus on one thing because they tweeted out a picture of a certain island, which could hint to a certain time frame during that era, but we're not really sure. So, like, I guess just to sort of get the ball rolling. Robert, so we know the Ring of Power, which is the one that Frodo slips on his finger and goes invisible. And these rings were created by Sauron.
Yes,
with the help of elves. And I guess kind of, do you want to explain sort of like how that started?
Well, I can give you, if you don't mind me rambling for like 3 minutes, I'll give you the potted version of what's going on here. So this is a cunning plan by Sauron, who is obviously the big bad, but he took on this kind of magical form that made him appear a bit like an elf, really quiet, nice looking person, oh so innocent. And he went to the elves and he said, hey, I can show you how to make magic rings. Do you want to learn how to make magic rings? Some of the elves that we know about, people like Elrond, said, nah, it sounds a little bit suspicious. But there's this one guy called Celebrimbor who said, yeah, show me. And so Elrond was there, and he was there for decades. This is a long burning plan. This isn't just like a short-term thing. This is a long-term thing. And he showed him how to make magic rings. And he made the 9 rings that ended up with the Nazgul, with the Black Riders. They had 9 magical rings, so they each had 1. The Dwarf Lords got 7 of these magical rings eventually. And then they reached the point where Celebrimbor was about to make 3 more for the elves, and Sauron said, I'm just going to nip back home for a moment just to do a thing. And so he goes back to where we get the Cracks of Doom, and then he makes the Ring of Power, which is the ring that we know about. Now, this ring controls all the other ones. So his cunning plan was that he would make, with the elves, he would make these other rings that would control the most powerful humans, the most powerful dwarves, the most powerful elves, and he would have this one ring which would control all of the other ones. And that was how he was going to get control of all of Middle-earth. Cunning plan. Now, obviously there were problems with this, and they kind of smelled a rat. The elves smelled a rat. Celebrimbor made those 3 rings, the ones for the elves. He did them himself without having Sauron there, so those ones were kind of untainted, and they ended up with people like Elrond, Galadriel, Gandalf got one of them. So they're good rings, but the 9 rings that went to the humans, they absolutely corrupted them and turned them into these Black Riders, the Nazgul. Their lives were stretched thin, long lives, but made them incredibly powerful and completely under the control of Sauron. The 7 that went to the dwarves, they basically just made the dwarves greedier, and they did a whole lot more mining. So that was just like a little bit of an odd thing. But
they're like, we wanted more gold and riches, and now we're going to get
it. Exactly. So the plan didn't quite work. But what we're left with is a huge amount of these incredibly powerful rings dotted around Middle-earth that have these powers. And Sauron obviously had his one ring, which was the most powerful one, but his plan did not work. Now, he tried then sort of invading. Once he realized it had all gone a little bit wrong, he then tried invading and got pushed back a bit. And that's that's the sort of the backdrop to the story of these rings of power.
Nice. So it's kind of like the rings are almost like a device that he uses to harness his power, which is to influence your mind. Like he doesn't have a like super strength or he can fly or whatever. He just has the ability to manipulate your mind. And when he passes these rings out to everyone, his plan is to be like, all right, I'm gonna eventually take over and rule. And it sort of backfires, and it doesn't really work. With the dwarves, you can't really control them. They're focused on digging holes, and they smell funny, according to the elves. And then with the elves, like you said, they were crafted as like uncorrupted by his. And I think when he put on that one ring, they could see sort of what it was. They could see that it's like a honing device for his power. So they were just like, none of that. They weren't really having that much of that. Now, you mentioned Gandalf getting one of the rings. There was a little bit of like, I thought Gandalf was just a wizard, but he's like, I thought he was a human who learned about magic or something, and he's like old. That's not really the case. So Gandalf is like an angelic being. I think, is it Maiar or
Maiar? Yeah.
Okay. So then the Maiar are the servants of the Valar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Valar,
and they're the Valar, I guess Valar. They're the direct servants of Aruvatar, who's like the creator of that universe. So Gandalf is pretty powerful, with him being a Maiar. And there's that one scene that, you shall not pass. He's fighting a Balrog, and the reason why he's able to do that is because they're on the same power level of field. Like a Balrog is another Maiar. So I didn't know that. I felt like I would just share that with everybody because I thought that was pretty confusing. I'm like, how is someone who I thought was a human that learned magic? You know what I mean? How is he able to stand toe to toe with him, with what appears to be like the main boss in this game I play, Elder Scrolls Online? He looks like this main, which is heavily influenced by Lord of the Rings. He looks like this main boss. Anyway.
And that's why, incidentally, with Gandalf, why he can come back. So it's like people say he dies and then he comes back. It's because he's actually a spiritual being. We think of him as just being like a human. That's not what he's like. He's a spiritual being. So the body dies, he just gets a new body. He gets an upgrade. That was what was going on there.
Yeah, so with the wizard, so he's called Gandalf the Grey at first, and the Sauron on the right, Radagast the Brown, and then the two blue wizards who like kind of just disappear into the east or whatever. Yeah. So are the colors judging on their levels of like magic? So is Radagast the Brown not as powerful as Gandalf the Grey, and then so on, like Gandalf not as powerful as Sauron until he comes back? Or
it's never said explicitly. The leader of the order is Saruman, who is the white, and then when Gandalf comes back, he sort of upgrades himself to being white. So they're kind of they've allowed themselves those colors as being sort of rankings in a way. But the blue wizards, as you say, they arrive, they head off to the east. We don't really see or hear of them again. Radagast, who was a fantastic character in the Hobbit movies. I wasn't a huge fan of the Hobbit movies, but that character was so great. Exactly. And one in the hair as well. And it was just like, but yeah, so that him being the brown was kind of symbolized the fact that he was there with the dirt and the nature and all of this. And so other people look down on him, and Gandalf is just like, he is really powerful, but I understand why you think he's just like a crazy old fool.
Yeah, so it's like they were all, I guess, given paths, and Gandalf is the only one that stayed true to it, I guess. Like the Radagast the Brown sort of got like influenced by nature and just kind of like, I guess, allowed that to consume him. I guess we could focus a little bit on kind of some big points of the Second Age. Like we mentioned, it's 3,400 year time frame, so it's kind of hard to pick one, but we do know with him tweeting a picture of Numenor, that it could focus on when Sauron is like, so there's like this big battle. I can't think of the characters' names, but basically Sauron is taken like prisoner, I guess, and when he goes to Numenor, he sort of starts corrupting. And Robert, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Numenor is just in the Second Age. This was an island created just for the Second Age. It's there almost all of the way through, and it was given as a gift to the humans who helped out in the big fight of the First Age at the end, defeating the big baddie Melkor, who was Sauron's mentor, effectively. And as a reward, humanity got given this island. And over this 3,441 years Second Age, this island nation, Numenor, grew into the biggest, most important, most civilized place that humanity had ever seen. Then, as you say, Sauron was always trying to be taking over. But at some point, the Numenorians captured him and brought him to Numenor, and he's this prisoner. But Sauron, it's kind of hinted that Sauron allowed that to happen because he's got a grudge against the elves and the Numenorians. And he, whilst from being a prisoner in Numenor, he kind of worked his way up. At this time, he's not just like this kind of weird guy in big armor with like the one eye or anything like that.
Yeah, he still has a form.
He has a form, and he has a form which is a beautiful form. This is we were talking slightly beforehand, and I called him Sexy Sauron. This is what we should be expecting, is that he is this charismatic guy, and he works his way up through society until he is there advising the king. And the slow decay of Numenor, which had started a long time before, he accelerates it, and they turn their back on the worship of the true God, and they turn their back on the elves. Elves are banned from the land, and there was one big rule that there was with Numenor, which was that they were not allowed to sail west. They could go east, they could go north, they could go onto Middle Earth, the continent, but they could not sail west. And the reason why is west is you get Valinor, which is the place. This is sort of the home of goodness. It's almost like heaven. And they were not allowed to go west out of sight of Numenor. And Sauron there was like, that's a stupid rule. You should go west.
it's like the snake in the Garden of Eden.
Exactly. Sort of. So he then persuades the king Ar-Pharazôn to build this huge navy. I think it was called the Great Armament, and they head off west, and they arrive, and basically Eru Ilúvatar, the Valar go, nope, you broke the rules, and the army gets destroyed. The island of Numenor itself, which is like almost a continent, it's a huge island, that just gets, the seas wash over it, the whole thing just collapses down into the ground, and everyone who was there almost dies. And that is the end of the Numenorians, except for some small survivors that perhaps we'll talk about in just one moment. And Sauron himself, he kind of limps back home. That's when he loses this ability to have a human form. He's got the victory he wanted, but the cost to him was huge.
And just to sort of placate it to the movies, Aragorn is a descendant of those Numenorians, like one of the last descendants of them. Yeah. Right. So that's how he can live for so long, is their bloodlines, I guess, were extended as part of being on Numenor. I'm not really sure how that worked, but they lived a lot.
They started out being able to live for very long, and then over time it sort of came down. So Aragorn had a very long life, but then, by our standards, certainly. But then, his ancestors lived very, very long lives, like 1,000 years long kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's like the men and the elves are sort of held in high regards by the by the Tolkien universe as God, right? He's like special. He holds the elves and the men as special creatures. So men are allowed to forge their own destinies, and then the elves are sort of obsessed with, like, I guess, living forever, or not living forever, I guess, preserving themselves. And then the reason why men go to wars and stuff, and I guess get corrupted by, part of the reason why they could get corrupted so easily is because they're the only ones that are given such short lives, and it's supposed to be a gift, but because they live such short lives, it's like there's a lot of the stuff that that Tolkien writes about is sort of like, you can, just like with Game of Thrones, you can relate it into modern day stuff. So this is like why humans, the source or the quest for the everlasting fountain of youth and all that stuff. And it's like, that's always been a goal. And still to this day, we're always trying to extend our lives past the point. So I think him making that a driving force for the race of men in that universe is perfect. It like totally makes sense. And then like the idea of death being a gift is like, it's pretty deep. But yeah, so with the second age, you just kind of summarized what the show would sort of, I guess, be focusing on, that time frame somewhere in there. Maybe it could be right at the decline of Numenor, and maybe we get to see that's where the main focus on the show is, or I guess the main sort of like, I guess, how King's Landing is for Game of Thrones. Like a lot of those scenes take place in King's Landing and Winterfell. I guess we could have Numenor as like that, and then maybe they go to Middle Earth at some point, and it's kind of like awesome to see because maybe we'll get to see some hobbits or so. I don't know. But so some of the cast, and we, if Robert would want to, I want to do like a more focused, in-depth one where, let's say we do a podcast just on the creation of the rings or whatever. But this one's more just kind of like a generalized, like, beginner's guide to, okay, what to expect with the show and sort of what you should research more into so you can be prepared when you watch the show. But we don't really have the exact names of the cast, but we do, like, what characters are going to be playing on the show, but we do know the names of some of the actors. And Robert, you were telling me about Joseph Mall, who actually played Benjen, Uncle Benjen on Game of Thrones. He has a code name of, what were you saying?
Oren, which for me sounds very like Sauron, and the publicity picture that they've put of him is just like, how do you make somebody look as evil as possible? He's just like he's got that dark, broody look already, but it's just like I don't know, the lighting or whatever just makes him look so sinister. It's I'm almost convinced that he is Sauron. I mean, I couldn't be 100% because they've not announced it, but 95% sure.
Yeah, it's like with Game of Thrones, they would give the characters a name that was like, I guess sometimes it would be close to what their actual name was, but then other times it would be like just a complete throw off. And I know, I remember at one point, a lot of people thought that it was going to focus on a young Aragorn. So I didn't really know much about that time frame, but I feel like there's not enough to sustain a show. They want to make it like Game of Thrones. They want to go all out. They need something like you were just saying, the second age in Numenor to extend that. But who are some of the other more notable characters during that time frame?
Just in terms of, and it's slightly nerdy, but the rights that they've bought, just to clarify, they've bought at the moment just the rights for the second age, which means that any of the stuff for the third age, which is the story of the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, when Aragorn was around, or Legolas, all of that stuff, they can't touch. Similarly, they can't touch the stuff before. They have to do everything in there. Now, they're allowed to kind of like invent stories, but they can't contradict anything that Tolkien wrote. So that is the structure there. But in terms of who's around at that time, then you get the Numenorians. So you've got King Ar-Pharazôn, who's the king of the Numenorians at the time. And there's a split in the Numenorians between the people who were like going with the king, who were called the King's Men, and the people who stood firm, who were called the Faithful. And the leader of the Faithful was a guy called Elendil, whose name may ring a few sort of like vague bells. He was the father of Isildur, who you will remember from the very first scene of The Lord of the Rings, the first movie, where you got that flashback. And he was the guy... Yeah, the Great War. And Isildur, who will be around at that time in Numenor, he was the guy who chopped the ring off of Sauron's finger and had the chance to throw it away. And you could have ended the movie after 5 minutes, but he didn't. He turned his back, and you got, if you remember, there was like Elrond there going Isildur, and it was just like, and he's so Isildur is is going to be there. He will be one of the leaders of the faithful. So he's going to be one of the good guys, as it were. I mentioned Elrond. The elves live for centuries and centuries, millennia. Elrond was around. Galadriel was around. A few of the other elves. Well, yeah, we're going to have, I think, we're going to have young Galadriel. So elves don't really age, but I think they're going to show us slightly younger than Cate Blanchett in the movie. So, whether we see much of them, I don't know, because the elves aren't. They're obviously based in places like Lothlorien and Rivendell and things like that. So they're not on Numenor, so I don't know whether we're going to see them, but they are around. A lot of the other characters that we know, even people like Gandalf, haven't arrived. He only gets sent across in the Third Age. So the main character that we know is going to be Sauron, and I think he is going to be like almost an anti-hero all the way through this.
Yeah, for sure. I could totally see them playing that part of like a villain, but we could see the gray area of where he's not necessarily like that. Like they could play on that, our emotions of watching him. Now, you said, I think it was Isildur. I think
Isildur. Yeah.
Isildur. Okay, so that guy who chopped off Sauron's hand, right, where the ring dropped.
With the ring, yeah.
Yeah. So the sword is shattered, and those fragments are given to Aragorn. So Aragorn is that guy's direct descendant back however long.
Thousands of years later, yeah.
Yeah, and then he also gets a ring that is from that era. I think there is some significance to it. I can't remember what it was, but I don't know. I need to do some more research to that. But just to wrap that back to like the Lord of the Rings story that we know, the guy who chops off Sauron's ring hand and then the sword shatters, that's like Aragorn's direct descendant, which they say that in the show. I just wanted to link that. Or I mean in the movies.
Yes, and so Isildur, just to round that one off, so he he was part of the Numenorians who escaped, the good guy Numenorians, the faithful who escaped. They founded two big kingdoms, Gondor, that we know, with Minas Tirith and places like that, and Arnor, which was slightly further to the north, that disappeared after lots of wars over time. But he, having got the ring off of Sauron, having not thrown it into the Crags of Dune and destroyed it, he then got killed, and he was killed in the river, and the ring then just sort of got washed down and washed away, and that was when many years later he got found. Exactly, you're there ahead of me. So that is what it is. So the Ring of Power is, at the time, probably of the time of the show, Sauron still has it. And that is probably going to be quite important. And the other thing with the Rings of Power, to bring us back to the conversation we had before, of the 9 Nazgul, the Black Riders that we see in the movies, 3 of them, we're told, were from Numenor. So there's a very good chance that 3 of the Numenorians are people who are going to turn into the Black Riders at a later date.
Nice. So there's a chance that we could maybe see like, I guess, a parallel with Frodo and Bilbo being ring bearers with Sauron, but it doesn't affect him. But we could also see someone like coveting the ring as like, is like precious to him. Obviously, he's the one that created it, but we get to see that parallel, and it just reminds us even more of Lord of the Rings. And I think that familiarity is going to obviously draw in more viewership. It's like, with House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones spinoff, a lot of it's going to be taking place in King's Landing. It's going to feel very familiar. You know what I mean? There's a lot of like backstabbing, portrayal, and all that stuff. So it'll feel like a show that we're familiar with, which I think helps with spinoffs, and that's why they kind of do it. They're going to do it that way. The same with the Lord of the Rings TV show, because like you said, they only bought the rights for the second age, so that means that technically Lord of the Rings and all that stuff is canon. This is before that. So since that is not going to be changed, they have to respect obviously what happened during those movies.
I think they're going to play it like an origin story. I honestly do. I think they're going to like say, you know about the ring, you know about Aragorn, who's just like descended from kings. You know about Sauron. Let's find out where they all come from. That I think is what we're the way that they're going to be playing it. Where does the ring come from? Why is it that Aragorn's such an important king? And what is going on with this ring? That's the whole point, I think.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be awesome. It's not gonna be one of those like retelling that everyone gets worried about when something's remade. It's like it's just an enhancement to it. You know what I mean? It's not like they're redoing the original Star Wars movies or they're redoing the original Lord of the Rings. This is just going to be like complimentary that goes along right with it. And I think Lord of the Rings has been out for such a long time. A lot of those people working on that show grew up as fans of those movies, read those books. Maybe the Hobbit cartoon that came out in the 80s, right? Like I can't remember that. I remember I remember watching it in like 5th grade in school and being like, "Wow, this cartoon is old as hell." And that was like 2001. So I know it's been out for a while, but yeah. I don't think we have too much to worry about them sort of ruining what we already love so much. But I kind of wanted to keep this short. Like I said, it's a beginner's guide. Robert, was there anything that we missed that you think should be sort of mentioned?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I would say is that this Numenor, if they are focusing on Numenor, isn't just like a sideshow. The best way to think about it is Atlantis in sort of legends that we know about. This was the pinnacle of everything that humanity ever created. It was like the height of civilization, the height of magic, the height of technology. Everything was going on there. And what we're going to see is the downfall, I suspect, of that civilization through one incredibly charismatic but evil character.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have such an eloquent way of putting that, dude. Like, I'm like, all right, keep going. But yeah, so I feel like that's gonna be paralleled a lot. You know, obviously in Game of Thrones channel. So I keep relating this back to House of the Dragon. We get to see the Targaryens at the height of their power with 20 plus dragons everywhere, and then we get to see them fall and crumble. And that's awesome that we get to see Lord of the Rings like that, because that's very much what I was well aware of, that they do a really good job in the movies of this greater era, and this is sort of at the decline of that. Magic is leaving the world, and it's at a time where everything is like coming up to a head, and then it's gonna, you know, all go crazy like some sort of cataclysm. I don't know, trying to use a big word to sound smart like you.
It was a great word, and you are definitely smart, so don't worry about that.
But yeah, so it's gonna be awesome to see what was like, because even in, you know, the Hobbit movies, we still see like this echo of a greater time period and era that was like sort of what we think of when we think of like high fantasy, is like there's this time frame that like everything was good, and then the story mainly takes place thousands of years after that. It's going to be interesting to finally get to see something that takes place during that time frame where everything was at the height of all this stuff. And I think your comparison with Atlantis is perfect. That is literally, a lot of people, you know, I don't think it was necessarily ever existed, but I think the idea of it is that you kind of, once there's nowhere to go but up. So once you reach that point, you have to kind of, it's going to naturally bring itself down. It's like human desire is like, we always want to innovate until we can't innovate anymore. And then we just sort of self-destruct. It's like, where else is there to go? And that's what we're going to get to see with it. I think it's going to be super exciting to get to see all of the like golden armor and these like crazy buildings in Numenor. Like it's gonna be awesome, man. Really excited. But since we kind of wrap this up perfectly, Robert, did you want to tell everyone where they could find you at? Maybe some videos you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're into Lord of the Rings, I do at the moment 1 or 2 Lord of the Rings videos every week. My channel is in Deep Geek. I just dig into the history. I dig into the characters, the plots, the kinds of things we're expecting to be seeing in the TV show. So if you're interested in that, in Deep Geek, as Mark said, there's going to be a link down there somewhere.
Yep. All right. And thanks for joining me, man. I actually learned a bunch. I'm excited. And, if you want to come back on, I'm going to try to put out maybe a Lord of the Rings video once every couple of weeks or something, just sort of easing myself into it. Maybe, like I said, next time we could focus on just one specific thing, and like that'll give me time to sort of learn up on it, so I'm not just like, oh, what's that guy's name? You know what I mean? But thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video. The like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed and make sure every notification's turned on so that you get alerted every single time I drop a video. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. Thanks again to Deep Geek. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Reviews.